Hello, welcome to tonight's live work in progress performance of Laura Brown-Lavoie's club Desire. I'm Chris Cho. I am a co-coordinator of word performance poetry, a spoken word group on campus, a space where marginalized individuals can find alternative ways of speaking their truths. We are here today to hear some incredible work from an alum of our amazing organization, from Laura. The source material for the show is a book of poetry that Laura wrote last year by the same name. It begins in a strip club by the river in a port city called Providence, where a mountain of coal, a tangle of scrap metal, tanks of natural gas, and several places for adult entertainment make up the riparian landscape. There at the edge of half salty water, a meeting place of three rivers and the bay. Laura is a longtime poet and performer in Providence, former co-host of the Providence Poetry Slam. She has represented the city as a finalist at the National Poetry Slam and the Women of the World Poetry Slam. She was a 2018 to 2019 Providence Public Library Creative Fellow and winner of the 2019 Fellowship for Merit in Poetry from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. She graduated from Brown Literary Arts in 2010 and spent 4 loving years, in the basement of Rights and Reason Theater with her fellow word poets, whose influence and inspiration continue to fertilize her practice as an artist. Laura's work as an artist is braided with her work with plants. She spent 10 years as a vegetable farmer and now focuses on building soil and plant medicine. Despite the digital format of tonight's reading, the poems of Club Desire seek touch. So Laura will periodically invite you to engage with the material physically, behind the velvet curtain of your private room. Performance is innately collaborative, and the wish of a work in progress performance is to receive feedback. So you will also be invited to share impressions and inspirations through the Q&A feature of this webinar, which can be found in the bottom of your screen. After Laura is finished reading, we will open up for question and answer. During that time, you are welcome to type questions you have for Laura about the work, her art practice, or whatever else is on your mind. And I'll help by reading them aloud so we can have some version of dialogue together. Tonight's reading begins with a music video collaboration Laura did with artist Kay Soros Cobb, which situates the work in its neighborhood and history. Thank you for your richness of your presence for poetry this evening.
It's the end of the age. Oh, take. 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 Now we hear. Now we see. Now we touch. Now we breathe. It's the end of the age. Oh, take. 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 Now we hear. Now we see. Now we touch. Now we breathe. Now we burn. Now we break. Now we eat. Now we pray. It's the end of the age. Oh, of day. It's the end of the age of day. It's the end now of the day. Now we rise. Now we call. Now we rise. Now we fight man. Now we hide. Now we touch. Now we love. Now we paint. Now we grow. Now we say all on a thing. Now we build up. Now we burn. Now we take down someone else's turn. End of the age of day.
The power plant blinks red at the edge of the skyline. This is a small city, but it smokes hard and winks at the mob. Good rent for a titty bar downstairs from the highway offices of Rhode Island and the Providence plantations. No one says that word anymore, the quaint part of the city's real name. The drawl makes northerners blush. Plant is what the first Roger did, after all. They farmed, allegedly with permission, but Metacom's head was 20 years affixed to a stake. Viciousness, the local cloth, New England wool woven with southern cotton. Now, tourists in blue jeans stroll the old mill. Water wheel, whale oil, white fluff, this innocent north. Our blue uniforms, our occasional rooms under the floor, but the receipt books have people in them. And the Underground Railroad had a reverse track, fugitive slave acts. The mansion money came from somewhere. Here, molasses was made more rabid for the passage. Here, a barrel of rum became some fraction of a man. They planted. That's what a settler does. And brought women, scripture, and the holy project of forgetting. And here we are with poetry to wholly remember. This book was all written here on Narragansett territory, and I'm so honored to share the poems with you tonight. The first one I want to share, I wrote this morning for all of you here joining me in your bodies in the real time of the moment. And I invite you to let yourself hear the poems however you want. If you feel like looking at a face saying them, you can look at my face, but otherwise you can look out the window or lie down. And since this is a work in progress, I'm really interested and welcoming your feedback at any point during the performance. If you want to type notes into the Q&A, we'll welcome them. And also there's a few times where I'll stop and kind of prompt your input if you want to participate. Thank you for being here. And here's the first poem that I wrote for you today. I'm going to read it out of my journal. This is for you, embodied one. A new tooth bulging smooth through the gum. Days of warm ache before the blood comes. Socks off on a lush rug or glass smashed in the trash truck at dawn. No one has his name on yet. Stay, dumb pumpkin, lit from within. The years hold a steady candle. It was fun to feel cloth give us beauty, to feel beauty itself do the work. There's nothing so elegant as the right muscle needing a shovel, black earth, bloom of worms. This is for you, juice of the peach, to linger you here in the sticky face of being tasted right. Some loves are just one season, undressed from as leaves, as a snake. Thank you, good hands, who took my old skin. Between kisses you said, you, and it was enough to estrange me from all that can't stay. Another quick bloom I am. Am we soil? Am the heat deep in the pile? Name today, dahlia, tomorrow tall oak. This is for you, the one who watches pain as pain scrapes away even shape. Pain, the coiling throb, amniotic, shared as tissue between disparate wounds. This is your plane, smile after another long birth. This is you, child, birther, and earth. So Club Desire is a strip club down by the river. And it's also unfolding and unfolding for me as the arena of colony and the arena of taking. And in these poems, I sought to undress that extraction and start to say the word reparation, shake off the tension of that word and find the kernel of possibility and truth in it. I wanted to share a quote about desire from a great poet. We have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. But once recognized, those which do not enhance our futures lose their power and can be altered. The fear of our desires keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful. For to suppress any truth is to give it strength beyond endurance. I've been working on an essay that I called Desire Essay, and I was hoping we could collaborate on it today. If you want, you could rename yourself so that your submissions come in anonymously to the essay, or you can keep your name. If you want a suggestion for what to rename yourself, you could try human being. So the Desire Essay prompt number 1 is to recognize your yes. Start down at your feet and rise up through yourself until you encounter a yes. And instead of being chased by it into fear, just hold it there and take a look at it. Knowing our yes and feeling it deeply. And if you have a yes that you've recognized and a fear related to that yes, I invite you to type into the essay that we're working on what the fear is. Keep your yes and share the fear. I call this knowing fear. It's expelling it. We'll collaborate on this essay throughout. You can also start to add in your yes. So we have a braid of yes and fear. Here's the next poem. In the dark, you say open. This poem takes us to the club. In the dark, you say open. People know where legs lead, and they want to go there. The club has a pulse, open, open. Once a blunt weapon, it now deals a gentling blow. Don't get the wrong idea now. That particular wish requires audacity and cash, and she might still say you can't afford me. But a club does gentle its members, coming together out of a sticky aloneness to wave the same flag until sunup. From the privacy of a yearning, the question arises, do I have audacity and cash? Or will the internet suffice? Am I just regular hungry for food, or do I have an infinite hunger? One body does not wholly sate. In the dark, you say open. Club pulse in the fear cave of the bat self. Strobe, bodies, neon, all of them possible. Yes, you are allowed to vibrate along the whole length of you, to choose your note and hold it. You may unpetal any bud, receive any ball, read any page the book is splayed to. Open is a city so undefended as to be deemed immune from bombardment. Every country agrees this city is 24 hours a day comforting and safe. The textbook too has its myths, open land, murderous advertisement. People know where legs lead. They find a gentleman or act a gentleman at the door. Before girls, we wanted trees. Now an oil rig by the water, phallatic silhouette lift and dip. Who choreographed these machines, so shameless against the sky? If you want to go to Club Desire, you have to be accompanied by a gentleman, I learned. And pulled it off. The next prompt for our desire essay is a dance. Maybe there's people around you to watch and maybe there isn't. So find in your body a body part that you've inherited. Maybe it turns on like a light bulb. This is the body part that I got, and I know who I got it from. And let that body part find its motion, its gesture. Here we are sitting in front of screens, but you don't have to be too close to the screen. You can move around. Find the dance of that body part that you've inherited. I'm going to do it too. And in this dance, now, find the desire that you inherited. The desire you've been given in your body, in your family, in the rhetoric of your country. Is this a desire that drives you? Is this a desire that you are done with? If it's a desire that drives you right, find the gesture of keeping it. If it's a desire that you need to be done with, find the gesture of flinging it. And if there are words for the fling, you can add words. It's nice to have a word be rhythmic on the fling. Motherhood. Property. Okay. Come back to your keyboards. And if you could quick type in the score of the dance you just did. A score is like basically the poem of the dance. So you could type in the body part that you've inherited and the gesture of that body part, describing words. You could type in the desire that you inherited and the gesture of that desire, describing words. And finally, the method, the gesture of flinging, the release. And we're really creating kind of a beautiful poem. One desire I inherited is for booze. And that is the name of the next poem. Brief epiphany, Icarus wax, swaddled nameless infant, black plastic sack. In the beginning there was a darkness on the water, take us back. Cork sound, wet mouth, pour me another. Dead uncle, drunk mother, hot lack. Horror, we all agree, is an empty hand. After work, or near music, during snow, with brothers or alone, or in the vicinity of women, come, damp those palms on a glass. Tasteless sensation, nameless taste, endless confession, a rum kingdom gone dumb. The bass beat dizzies, no sip sits, it rises, blood moon to each cheek, like shame but wetter. A teacher I know said the heart of addiction is the heart of devotion. And I honor everyone whose bodies have brought them so close to the edge of themselves in their pull for drinking, in their pull for merging, or whatever we're addicted to. Release is my prayer. I have one more poem to share before we talk a little bit. And I'm grateful for the Desire essay that you helped me with. Wow. I love your responses. We'll find a way to share them. This last poem was actually the first poem of the book, and I wrote it the day after a gas leak on Allen's Avenue near Club Desire, when I started to feel the necessity of some poetry around the smog of this city and the smog of our history clogging our lungs. Sunrise through a fine smog off Allen's. Last night, gallons of gas escaped the main, a shimmering pillar, loud as a jet. Kids dreamt they would become cars or lay, asthmatic, wakeful to the sound. The only establishment evacuated was Club Desire. The smell of fuel dulled all want. One lit match and the whole strip would have lain naked of its road. We stood outside listening to the gas waste itself into our lungs, as if we might be machine enough to combust. But we're animals, in animal print underwear, some of us, trying to remember the shape of the tooth that chased us here, the shape of the tooth that awaits us on the other side of a lap dance, which is another name for mourning. There are visceral nights when a gas plume shivers the moon, and I know I might lose you any minute to an innocent cigarette over a hot manhole, to the spark of another person's metal. These visions, a sharp blade to which I offer my widest artery, I would be outlived. Easy, Juliet, so hasty stiff. What another minute's stillness would have warmed those lips. There are worse bandits than other living women. There is flame. There is a blue shirt, killer blue. What a toy-sized bereavement it would be to feel your beloved heat receive and be then in contact atmospheric. Breathe in the gas you hiss out, breathe out my gas at you. We are outside Club Desire now, in last night's guileless panties. Dumb monks of dawn, breathing in the, turning off the neon sign. A real neon impends. The bay hammers itself gold, and the unlit ghosts disperse to whatever heaven is reserved for pure fuel. That's the last poem I'll share from the book tonight. Before we open to Q&A, if you have any snatches of phrase that stuck with you, or poems you remember that I read that hit you in any way, and you want to just take a quiet moment for more dialogue to give feedback on the poetry, I'd love to read what you have to say. And then Chris will come back and we'll have a little bit of dialogue.
very much. Those are some beautiful poems and some beautiful movement in a time where we don't engage our body enough. Um, I think there's something really beautiful about bringing desire into this space where, and bringing so much of body and tissue and into the space. So not only are you able to feel your words through emotion, but also as it is embodied. Um, so I wanted to thank you for bringing that into the space today. Um, yeah, I think one thing that just to get a conversation started, um, if you want to go ahead, um, I'm interested in the poem that you wrote this morning, thinking about um, a lot of like phrases talking about like tissue and amniotic and bring the body into a space where we're not all like in each other's physical spaces. Um, so I'm interested in hearing some of the that, as well as how are you relating to desire in a space that could be described as lacking thereof, or when we're all so atomized.
Thanks for those questions, Chris. I've been really connected to other people through physical pain lately. I've had about like 10 months of of extremely intense menstrual pain off and on. And simultaneous to that, I have been deepening into my work as a birth doula, which means I'm someone who attends labor for people who are giving birth. And those two things side by side make me, I just have this organ in my body that really concretely connects me to other people's bodies, and basically to everyone's body, since that's what we all popped out of. And so I think that the poem that I wrote this morning kind of has a little bit to do with that, the way that my body connects me to other people, even if I'm not touching them or in the same room with them. And at the same time, also how physical pain can sometimes, physical pain or ordeals of any sort can also be opportunities to let old versions of myself drop away, and see what's left behind, as I continue to grow. And poems are kind of like that too. They feel like the traces of what I knew at any given moment in my life. If I decided to write a poem down, it was whatever seemed clear and obvious to me at that moment. And it's a kind of special thing to have been writing poems long enough to have a trace of the arc of understanding I've had over time.
That's something that I think I also relate to as a fellow poet. For one thing, I think it's really amazing to be able to see a Ward alum perform and bring some poetry into this space, since that opportunity is relatively rare. And I think also being able to like just hear about um, the like practice of like what goes into um, what starts writing poetry, how that clarity comes to you um, for that expression. I know that at least personally, and a couple of my friends that I have that I've been talking to who are also artists, um, have been struggling at this time where things aren't so clear, and like it's been harder to feel grounded, and it's been harder to like get a grasp of like what is real and what is feeling, And so I think finding inspiration has been really difficult during these times. So what are some ways that you've been able to draw inspiration or have struggled or dealt with that struggle?
Yeah. I open my notebook and my pen every day, which is, you're definitely not going to write a poem unless you do that, or open your computer. And I find that to be just kind of like a basic mechanical thing of creating the moment for the poem to happen. And as for inspiration, I had a head injury a year ago. I got a concussion, and it really changed the way that I write, because a lot of, especially like, I think part of being a student, and especially kind of like an overachiever, is that you get really a lot of practice at like having an idea and figuring out how to get your idea across with the strong desire to be understood and be convincing. And I think I was always drawn to poetry because of how relative to, say, the expository essay, poems let go a little bit of the desire to be understood and kind of like surrender. Like the poet and the reader, when they agree to meet at a poem, both kind of give up on being understood and instead open themselves to whatever truth they might find in the words that came down on the page. So I've always loved that about poetry, but still kind of like in the slam world especially, and also just in the human wish to connect and be known. I think I often still would start poems with this kind of like thesis of like, this outrages me out in the world, and I want you to finish this poem similarly outraged. Or all of a sudden I know how much I love a person, and like I know exactly how to say it, and at the end of this poem everyone's gonna know how much I love them. Or I got really hurt in this way as a child, and I'm gonna create the poem that evokes my hurt for everyone. And so all these ambitions to be understood have often motivated and inspired a poem to happen. And I kind of I appreciate it when a thesis that strong comes up and poetry answers it. And I've found that with my head injury, not that able to, I've had to let go even more of being understood or even understanding the words as well. And instead, I have a new kind of like passivity when I write, where I basically ask the poem to come. And I have my pen, and I let the title of the poem get written down. And then I let the next line get written down from the title. And sometimes it is something I'm studying in my life, like the title comes to me while I'm walking. Usually a title comes to me. And that's like striking the match, but the fire that happens, I don't plan it out at all anymore. I just drop the match into the tinder and record it lately.
Thank you. So moving from talking about beginning poems, there's a question from the audience. Because this is a reading of work in process, how do you know when a poem is done? Are your poems a living thing that are never done, or baked cake to be shared at some point before it gets burnt?
I love that question. Well, I'm in love with the first draft, always. Even though sometimes they are shitty and I know that, and I would like never, this notebook that I wrote, you know, this was the poem I wrote for you today. But like many of the poems in here are just totally no one's, oh, there's some drawings, totally no one's ever gonna see a lot of them. But I love them, and in some ways they're finished because of that blurt of the moment, just the mark of the moment that they are. But this book was such an amazing experience because I've made lots of little chapbooks of my work, but I've never tried to make a manuscript. This book has like 70 poems in it. And I did a lot of editing and revising and reordering, and I slashed a ton of poems out of it. And to be honest, every time I open the document, I futz around in there. But the main changes that I make at this point to the poems that I've deemed done are sometimes spatial, like changing the way the lines are on the page. That's mostly how it is, because I'm trying to see how it would feel to open this book as a physical object. But basically, I feel like a poem is done when the best answer after all that blabbing, the best answer is I feel like a poem is done when I actually enjoy saying the whole thing out loud. And I don't fucking bore myself when I say the whole thing out loud. That's a foolproof test. Like if you can't get it out when you're fucking alone in your room, like you're not gonna really wanna share it with anyone. And then another amazing next level test is to memorize it. Because that's seriously a commitment to this poem, you thinking it's good. You will never be able to memorize a poem that you actually think is shitty, because why would you ever do that? There's a lot to keep in your mind. So those are the two best tests for me. Can I read it out loud and stay with it the whole time? And also, next level, can I memorize it?
Yeah, that's totally real. Copsy last year was sadly canceled, so we did not have to memorize any poems this year, but can definitely attest to the commitment that memorizing poems really is.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about memorization. It's such an intimacy with your own decision making. Like you can't hide from yourself when you memorize your poem, because every single word is going in there, and you're like, really? Was I lazy? Was I? Is this too many words? You know. So it's a great editing tool, and it feels like the world is a busy place, but if you ever make the time to memorize someone else's poem, that is such a gift from that poet to you, and from you to that poet. The poet Jane Hirschfield one time said about memorizing someone else's work, that the poet sat there reading it to themselves while they wrote it, and then as you memorize it, your mouth and voice, your throat are doing the same choreography that the poet did when they wrote it. So it's this physical intimacy. So like you can basically like hold your heroes in your own throat and in your mouth, and also learn about their decision-making process in poetry writing as you memorize it. So it's worth it.
Completely. We have another question from the audience. We have two comments from the audience. Title first, that's interesting. I like the idea of striking the match with the title. And then another that just says sad in all caps, presumably about Cupsy being canceled this year. I do agree. It makes me very sad. The other question that we have from the audience: how do you balance the auditory experience, the performative experience, and the physical experience of a poem? I've never thought of poems having all those angles to balance.
I love this question, and it feels like the question comes from two sides, sort of. It's like, how do I balance that as a listener or receiver of poems, and how do I balance it as a writer and performer of poetry? And not sure which version the asker was asking, but I guess I'll answer first as a lover of poetry, that I love to hear poems out loud, and I think the oral experience is a deep one and a human yearning that that we honor by listening to one another. And there's deep embodiment that happens when we get to hear a poem come out of the person who made it. To me, this is a potential for great infectious empathy. And I know that, like, in my arc as a human, in my own body, that the experience of hearing poetry come out of bodies near me has been a great deepening of my sense of interconnectedness with people. So that's one side, the receiving of the physical experience of someone else's poem. And then when it comes to performing, I'm still learning this balance. Last night I watched a poetry reading by Dion Brand and Harriet Mullen, who are two illustrious elder poets. And I learned so much from them because they just read straight out of their books. And they really trusted in their poems to communicate all the depth of their work to us, as opposed to the kind of youthful, performative desire to kind of like infuse the words with a lot of voice and physical zeal that can sometimes feel manipulative. Probably the best example out there, in my opinion, of someone who lets the poem come out of them in a way that honors the text and is still a riveting performance, is the poet Tongo Eisen Martin, who has many videos on the internet, and I highly recommend studying his delivery. Not because you could ever replicate it, but just because he's an example of great spontaneity when it comes to the recitation of poems.
Yeah. That's a wonderful question and a beautiful answer. That's, I think, one of the things that I really appreciate about at least the abilities of Zoom is still being able to hear poems from other people and being able to share the space, even if we are so far apart. There are a couple other questions from the audience. What other poets and poems inspire you? And what other poets and poems have you been moved by lately?
Cool. Well, Tongo Eisen Martin and Dion Brand, especially last night, really opened my heart. I love Sasha Banks, who has a new book called America Mine. And the title poem knocked me out when I read it. There's a poem. I don't have the title on hand, so I can't say it. But I love Aracelis Girmay, who is actually, if you look up the Center for African American Poetics on the University of Pittsburgh, they currently have a all-week poetry series going. And Aracelis Girmay, who's probably definitely one of my favorite living poets, is reading on tomorrow evening at 6. So you could check her out. It's free, and wow, great opportunity. I love the poet M.C. Richards, who is no longer in her body, but continues to inspire me. And Always and Forever, Audre Lorde, whose words we heard today, a deep inspiration to me. The quote that I shared with you is from her essay, Uses of the Erotic as Power. And her words are with me always, and her poetry kicks ass. There are many more poets who rock my world, but you should email me if you want to talk more about poets.
Yeah.
I will. I don't know. I think I can chat. I wanted to chat out my email address because I really invite interpersonal feedback or conversation, and I also have I have a live show coming up that I'm not gonna spiel on in this session, but if you want to come, it's in Providence, and I'll let you know how to get there. So I'll share my email address in the chat. And maybe we should just take one more question if there is one, and then we can all go back to the physical world.
Yeah, we do have one more question. What was Brown like for you as a student?
It was a sort of solipsistic experience, by which I mean I was very self-centered, which I think is by self-centered, I guess I mostly mean like it was a very insular time where I kind of focused on the poets around me and the papers I was writing. I was kind of like a serious nerd. And so I guess I kind of think of it as this warm incubator that I was in, really like developing some tools of thinking and feeling, mainly truly among the poets in the basement. My classes were great, but it was really with my fellow poets that I feel like I did the most growing in terms of my heart. It's taken me a long time to realize some of the toxic attitudes that the university structure instills in students, especially a really competitive place like Brown, in terms of what types of knowledge are valuable and what types of self-expressions are valuable, and who a valuable contributor to society is. I, after graduation, immediately started farming and have never had a job that involved using any of the credentials I so laboriously earned at school. I worked hard in a studious type of way while I was there, and I'm mostly grateful for the endurance of thinking and feeling and listening that I got from my time at Brown.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time and your creativity and all of your beautiful art. Thank you for all of our attendees for your energy and your attention and your listening and your participation.
Thank you so much for being here for my poems. You probably have to look at screens a lot, and I'm grateful that you chose to look at this one for a little while. Be in touch if you care to, and be well and be whole. Thank you.